Looks sick. If you say it looks sick, then that that's a good shot.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, so we'll get started here in a second. You good? Everything else? All right. John, you good over there on your couch, man? You look really comfortable.
I am.
We need a John cam.
I'm 6 feet away.
Don't snore, though. That's all I ask, because if you fall asleep, we'll probably pick it up. So, all right, cool. Let's get started. Dan Day, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
Thank you. It's great to be here, Spencer.
Well, it's great to have you in Texas. I was asking just a moment ago, home base, you said, is in Pennsylvania?
Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So this is a bit of a trip, and I'm glad to be in this town.
Well, so I assure you, obviously, most people that I talk to enjoy coming to Texas. There's a lot of business here. The weather typically is better, at least in the wintertime, than the Northeast. Are you guys getting hammered with snow, or what's going on up there?
Yeah, it was -5 wind chill factor when I left, so this is very pleasant.
Yeah, I think we're going to hit 68 or something like that today.
Balmy.
Yeah, a little balmy. Yeah, I was out playing with my daughter in the backyard yesterday, and the sun was actually beating down on my face. And I'm like, this is awkward for January 30th. It's like, but that's Texas for you, man. I always forget, though, in February, for whatever reason, the switch happens, and it's brutally cold for about 30 days, and then we come out of it.
That's the longest month we have up in the Northeast is February. If you can muscle through that, usually March is right over the horizon. It starts to get much better.
Yeah, man. Well, so we'll enjoy the weather today, and we'll get you on your way. I know you got some meetings. That's what brought you in town, right?
That's right.
So how often are you traveling? Are you a regular traveler yourself?
I'm starting to travel a lot more, obviously, since COVID ended. I'm probably out on the road maybe once a week, different parts of the country. It's been California, here, Florida. So I've been getting out quite a bit.
Well, good. I'm happy to hear that. I think I'm going to be in 6 cities in 6 weeks total myself, just all over the country too, which is fun. But it's nice as a person that actually likes business travel. It's nice to know I actually get to start traveling again and actually be frequently enough, because it was so sporadic the last couple of years. It feels like we're slowly inching back to maybe what would consider normal nowadays.
I would say it's pretty close. And nobody loves the process of travel. That can be a bear. But I love visiting different cities, connecting with different people, whether it's talking, what people are doing personally, what's going on in their professional life. Yep. To me, it's just
that's a fun thing, right? We've been chatting for almost an hour beforehand, and I think there's something about when a person travels in, or I'm doing the traveling, that you've made the effort, right? You're here for a reason, but the energy, usually I feel like the energy is better. That's why I do the podcast in person, because I feel like, hey, we're going to capture 2 people in a room. It's kind of exciting to have a purpose to talk, right?
Yes.
In the same room, not over, these silly things on Zooms that we have to do. They have their purpose, but I much prefer this.
Yes, and I think there's a better personal connection that people make with other people when they're sitting there face to face like we are right now. Mm-hmm. Versus doing it virtually, which is certainly, that's a fine model for doing certain things, but I don't think it was ever meant to replace what we do in our business.
No, not till we get to the Oculuses on our face, right, and the metaverse, and start having meetings in virtual world. We'll see where that goes. But so, anyways, I know you're in town for meetings, and we'll make sure we'll keep the podcast on track. Just as a reminder, I did have Jonathan Lopez, Dr. John, on the show, and he's off camera, sitting over there on the comfy couch right now. Previously, right? So we've talked Meritain. Obviously, we'll still continue the conversation around Meritain. But Jonathan and I kind of covered the basics of what is a TPA, what's the TPA's role. So we'll be able to pick that conversation up a little bit further downstream. And the people out there that are listening, that was, I believe, episode 8. But before we do that, I would love to get to know you. I know we started doing that off camera, but I'd love the chance to do it on camera. Tell us about your background, growing up, life story, work history, et cetera. Whatever you want to talk about, the floor is yours.
Well, I'll give you the abridged version of the novel. But I actually was born and raised in New Jersey for the first part of my life, but then moved around quite a bit across the country, California, Maryland, the Southeast. My dad was in sales, so when it was a new opportunity, we picked up and moved. My uncle was in the moving business. That was a curse, because we could go from one place to another very quickly. But then even with my job, I've had a couple of relocations. So I've had the luxury, I think, to be able to be in different places, kind of get a sense of different subcultures in different parts of our country. I can pick up accents pretty easily.
Nice.
But it really helped me kind of socialize very quickly when I move into a place.
Because you have to restart friendships, right?
You have to restart friendships. You have to really connect quickly. Okay. And so I think that helped a lot. And then upon graduating college, I kind of fell into this business like most of us do. And quickly sort of found myself really enjoying the self-funded part of the business, which is the most complex part.
Oh, yeah. My favorite.
I loved how consultants and employers could get together and find ways to really craft a plan to meet the needs of their members, find ways to mitigate risk. And to me, that was always the way that health insurance should be done.
So when did you get introduced to self-funding? Was there a particular stop in your career, or was it gradual?
It was early in my career with Great-West Life.
Okay.
Great company. They had probably the best self-funding model for small employers, small being, 50 or more, and really grew across the whole country. And we found ourselves being the model that people wanted to go to if they wanted a self-funded plan for that lower mid-market space. They're really pioneers in the space.
So what was the learning curve? Because I always tell people, worked in the broker world. I was doing a lot of financial reporting. So you had to learn the numbers pretty quickly, and you had to learn the terminology. What's a spec? What's an ag? How do you subtract these certain claims? So I learned kind of trial by fire. But it took probably between the 3 to 6 month range of daily interaction with the terminology and numbers to feel where I was proficient to talk about. So was that your experience, or did you pick it up quicker?
That was part of it. The other part of it was I went through what they call group school.
Ah, yes,
where they
infamous
send
group
you through
school.
6 months of how to learn how to underwrite, contracts, funding vehicles, how stop loss really worked. So that gave you a real good, I would say, academic base to work from. And then once you're out in the field, you get your bloody noses when you get asked questions and you learn the material. So it was probably still that 6 months or so period.
And I think most things are like that, but it was, for whatever reason, it's a little more technical, right? And so people have difficulty picking up certain things early on. I was always inclined towards numbers, so that's why I think it was maybe a little quicker for me. But I was hooked. I actually, my first job was at a broker where I was experienced or exposed to self-funding, and they do these regular seminars here. And so the guy that hired me and said, hey, before you start, come to a seminar and check out what we do. I really want you to understand what we do. So I went to the seminar, and I was still within my 2-week notice period with my previous job. And I went back to the guys in the finance department. I'm like, have you heard about the self-funding thing? And like, this is really cool and how it works. And so, I mean, from the get-go, I was wrapped up in it. So, but that's the career side. Real quick, I don't want to gloss over the fact that you are a triathlete, right? And as well as a runner, is that right?
A rower.
A rower. Okay, so I mean, we're rowing on a river, right? Or
So
what?
rowing.
I mean, I know what a rower is obviously at a health club. Yeah.
So I row a single.
Okay.
I'm not in a crew. I did not do it in college. I didn't take it up until I was in my late 30s when I lived in Atlanta. And it's just in the morning when you're rowing, it's incredibly serene. It's really quiet. And really, you can just be very introspective, be within yourself, but yet really enjoy the activity. But I also compete on a national level. There'll be head races up in
to this day, right?
To this day,
like,
yes.
How often are you competing in a race?
During the summer, I'll compete maybe 6 times, and in the fall, maybe another 3 times.
That's amazing.
So
Okay.
it's a lot of fun. And I'm always thinking as I get older, it's going to get easier to win. What I'm finding is that the competition gets more brutal the older we get.
Okay.
And I'm rowing against former Olympians, coaches of universities, so I'm kind of somewhat out of my realm.
Pretty competitive? I have to ask.
I usually finish in
You
the
hold your
top
own?
3.
Okay. I didn't realize there was a competitive rowing space. I mean, obviously maybe it's a little more challenging where we live. I was at school for 1 year at SMU, Southern Methodist University here in Dallas. They started a rowing team for the girls during my tenure, and so I remember starting that team. They effectively were just going, who wants to show up at 6 a.m. and row, and you can be on the team, and got scholarships and things like that. But I find that fascinating as a style of exercise, because when I row on a machine, cardiovascularly, but my legs start to get heavy,
Yes.
and it's your entire body, right, that you're
You're using
incorporating.
pretty much 85% of your muscles.
Okay.
It's a fantastic sport.
Well, but also there's the triathlon element. So that's running, biking, and swimming, right? So how often are you competing in that as well?
I'll do maybe 4 or 5 of those a year, and I'll do what they call sprints or maybe Olympic distances, which that's everybody says, so what's the distance? The swim's almost a mile, the bike's 26 miles, and then you do a 10K run. And in that order.
Yeah.
So you don't drown if it's the end. But it works out really well. Again, I'm competitive in that. It's a lot of fun. I train with a bunch of other guys, so we keep it competitive amongst ourselves.
Well, that's cool. And how often are you competing in that, you said?
I'll do 4 or 5 of those a year.
And when did you get started? Like, how does one get started in, I want to go do a triathlon. Well, I don't know, I keep saying that. But the swimming part is the one that I'm always averse to. Like, the idea of swimming a mile is just, that's so beyond me. Yeah.
It actually was a little bet within an office.
Okay.
Down in Atlanta, there was one of the guys who was probably the least fit saying, hey, why don't we get all of us together to go do a triathlon? I said, you're kind of crazy. And I actually went to college to do the decathlon. So I was used to multi-sports and doing different things. And I'm like, okay, that's a really fun challenge, but the swimming is going to be the most difficult. I don't have a clue. So I went to the neighborhood pool to start to learn how to swim, and I almost drowned my first triathlon. I remember going up to the kayak saying, please help me, and she looked at me going, oh, come on.
Yeah.
And
oh, you're fine.
And I taught myself how to swim over time, and in fact, this morning, I actually swam at the hotel pool for about a mile.
Well, but that's dramatically different than open water swimming with a bunch of people in there at the same time, right?
It is. It's mayhem in the very beginning. You do get used to that. You have to overcome it mentally.
Yeah, that's I think the mental
really
side.
The biggest piece. The worst is going into the ocean triathlons, which I've done only a few. And we had some pretty rough surf, the one I did, where you're pretty much going up and down, looking for the buoys to go around. And
count me out, man. Keep me on dry land. Like it's what is it? What's that Waterworld? Like dry land is a myth. Like I want to be on dry land and just stay on dry land at all times. But so that's awesome, man. And I think we were talking about wellness before. Yes. Health and wellness is a big part of your life. So talk to me real quick about that before we get into the TPA side of things. What that means to you. I know you told me you've spoken before on health and wellness. So how does that, one, infuse your personal life, which it sounds like we know to a degree, but two, your role as a leader, as a business person, and can those two things intersect?
There's a real passion that I've developed around healthcare and the healthcare space and the part that we play in it. Mm-hmm. And I think the overall well-being aspect of that really plays into that as well. And part of that is modeling behavior. If you're going to be up talking about healthcare, how to bend trends, get a healthier population health, you have to be able to walk the talk.
Yeah.
In my belief system, anyway. And I think that comes from a position of being passionate about health. And that passion, I think, also spreads to the people you're talking to. And in my case, the people I lead.
Yep.
I want to be seen as a leader who's actually, he's actually doing the things he says everybody else should be doing in order to be healthier. So leading that healthy lifestyle, I like to call it. And that encompasses a lot of things, as we were discussing, whether it's exercise, getting the appropriate amount of sleep, paying attention to your diet. And there's just great information available out there that I'm constantly consuming to try to learn and try to be better within that space. But then also be able to message that if we're talking to a very large employer and they're challenged with the whole population health piece of that, as an industry, we have programs that are available to attend to that. And I think I speak from a better platform of, hey, I'm really here to help you and let me show you the way, if you're really embodying that total lifestyle.
Well, I like you said that, the kind of the leading by example, right? The living your value system. I was a captain of the college soccer team when I was in school, and I wasn't a great vocal leader, but I think the reason why I found myself in that position often at different levels is that the way that I conducted myself, the way that I lived my life, the way that the example I set on the field, I was more of a lead by example than necessarily a lead by telling. However, as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's important to do both, right? If you just lead by example, but you do it in a silent way, you're only really perhaps influencing the people within your inner circle that see how you live.
True.
So I'm trying to adopt more of an outward, outspoken, if you will, approach to that, because I do think it's important to have these conversations. It's important to maybe share the knowledge that you have, the experiences that you've derived as well. And if it does ultimately have a positive impact or influence on one person or a couple people, that's worth it to me. Mm-hmm. So just finding the blend of how much to say versus how much to do, and what is the best combination of those two things.
I think the other part of that too, Spencer, is when you're leading by that example, you are embracing different approaches to it. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is when you look at a population of overall people, my way is not the only way. My way works well for me. But there's a lot of other approaches where people can say, taking a 20-minute walk per day is really part of a wellness program. Mm-hmm. Maybe quitting smoking, that's another part of a wellness program. So there's a lot of different things we can do to influence that. You try as a leader not to come across as, hey, I'm hyper-competitive, I want to win all the time, and This is what I'm driving for. It's not that at all. I just really enjoy it. I enjoy training. I enjoy the people I train with, a lot of camaraderie. To me, it's just part of my life that I truly enjoy.
Well, when you look at the things that work well in aggregate, right? Like on a micro level, one particular aspect of health may not work for everybody. But in totality, there's certain things that, broadly speaking, do have a positive impact on people's life, whether it's the quality of life, whether it's their fitness level, whether it's their weight. There's certain things that, generally speaking, have broad application and successful outcomes. But I am cognizant of the fact that you don't want to be too absolute in the things that you discuss, because just because it works for you doesn't mean it works for everybody. And so I'm always trying to find where's that line that you approach and then you step back from, because you don't want to be condescending, you don't want to be that you know everything, and then you don't know everybody else's story or what their actual health condition is underlying that. So obviously I can't be an authority in that realm, but I think it's good to just talk about the things that you talked about. And there's certain things that do generally impact most people's lives if they adopt some of those behaviors.
They do, and you have to make it look fun
and
inclusive. And I think with that, you'll reach a lot of different people.
Well, I'm glad we're having these conversations. I told you last week, the one I had with Mike Cole at Vita Health, I'm starting to have these more outwardly as well. Maybe it's just because you get more of what you focus on, and I've started to focus on this more. But I enjoy these conversations immensely, and I could talk about them for forever too.
Same.
But I know we have a reason why you're here, so we'll obviously put that to the side. And let's, real quick, again, for somebody that maybe didn't see the episode with Jonathan or is not familiar with what a TPA's role is in a self-funded plan, could you take 30 seconds to just describe what it is that you guys do?
TPAs, I think, fill a very unique niche within our business. It's one that came about in the mid-'70s, right at the time ERISA was enacted, where employers then could hire an administrator to adjudicate the claims on their behalf, to their wishes, as we say. And a TPA still fits that model, but really where it's grown up is now it can attach different things to its platform. And the platforms are usually open architecture, where you can pull in different point solutions, as we call them, different network solutions, different payment models, really at the whim of those employers and consultants who really want to direct their healthcare towards their membership and how it's going to seek or really help their membership seek healthcare in a way that's both beneficial to the members and helps control the total cost of care. The difference, of course, between a TPA and a carrier platform is a carrier platform is a very legacy-like approach to it, meaning they build in a lot of the solutions that they've developed over the years in an elegant and very, I would say, integrated way. A great analogy would be you have Apple. Apple devices are completely integrated. It's got Apple software, it's got Apple hardware, it's very elegant, it's very easy to use. But if you really want to get into gaming, Apple's probably not the solution. A PC where you're custom making it, you're pulling in certain gaming chips, you want a certain type of video screen, audio where you can plug and play the different things you want for that high-level gaming experience. You're going to custom build your PC for that gaming experience. That's a TPA. You're custom making how you want to approach your solution.
Well, I like the term open architecture. I like that you use that. I think that's a really appropriate analogy. I'm thinking immediately Linux, which I think is completely open architecture, which is probably too far on the other side of the spectrum. But the fact that there is more plug-and-play solutions, there's flexibility that's inherent to it. I know, obviously, the association with the legacy side, the Aetna side, might, obviously, you can juxtapose what you do versus that solution, but of course, you don't want to go so far that it becomes untenable to understand what it is you actually do, right? Or, sure, we'll plug them and them and them, and all of a sudden it becomes this really convoluted mess because there's no structure at all to it. So there's probably some sort of happy medium in there, right, that exists.
There is, and you bring up another good point. We're starting to see what we call point solution fatigue.
Fatigue, yep.
And it's becoming a common term. So what we're trying to do as a business is find ways to optimize those point solutions. But also, our industry needs to put more rigor around evaluating some of these point solutions. There are things you need to take into account, such as cybersecurity issues, computing power issues, connectivity issues, data flows. All those things need to be taken into account, in addition to whether the point solution will really help do what it's supposed to do. So we're taking a step back and saying we need to evaluate all point solutions through that prism and say, will this certainly work, and is it sustainable, and is it going to make a difference?
Well, and so we hear often in our industry about disruptors, people that come in and disrupt things. Disruption to a degree is fine as long as it's a successful outcome on the other side of the disruption, right? If you come in to disrupt just to disrupt, and then all of a sudden you blow up the plan and the member experience is terrible, and then you're trying to piece it back together on the other side, that's not necessarily a good thing. So I do think it's appropriate that we move at a certain pace, right? A lot of people will want to radically overhaul things. That might work if you know what you're doing, one, or there's an employer that's willing to go along for that ride. But most people don't want, a complete overhaul of their plan tomorrow. So you take some baby steps to get there, right? And then you, like you guys are doing, perhaps filtering out some of the marketing versus what actually works.
Right.
And then, like you said, optimizing the things that do work. So ultimately, you're still offering a solution that is viable at the end of the day, which I think is important to understand, right? Because I sometimes even get point solution fatigue because of our platform can accommodate point solutions, but you don't really know ultimately which players their solution lives up to what the billing, right?
Correct.
And so how do we make sense of that? Because there's a lot of noise in the marketplace. There's a lot of vendors. Brokers have to do that as well. They have to do their own vetting process. And I imagine that's immensely challenging in order to do that.
Yeah, what's changed over the years too, Spencer, is the point solution industry, I'll call it, is now realizing that their point of contact is best served through the brokers and consultants.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Where before they would approach big TPAs or big health plans saying, would you adopt this for your whole population? That didn't seem to grab hold. So now they'll approach the major brokerage firms and say, this is a really great idea. Would you push this out to all your clients? And then they approach us and our fellow competitors. Will you adopt this as a point solution? So that pressure is coming from another direction now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I would say, passion behind that. We're going to do this for all of our customers, so you need to do this as well. And that's where we start to have some rigor behind the process to make sure it's viable.
Well, and if the broker acts as a gatekeeper, obviously they're somewhat putting their reputation on the line when they're recommending a solution. But if it does work, right, as a gatekeeper, then that vendor has access to hundreds of clients instead of selling one by one, which is a challenge. So we were talking about this earlier. I personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't think the broker consultant ever goes away, or at least doesn't go anyway time soon, because of the important role they play in evaluating a very sophisticated marketplace and making recommendations based upon that.
I wholeheartedly agree. In fact, a gentleman that I've known for a very long time actually gave a speech right after Obamacare was passed, saying this will not take the brokerage consulting community away from this business. He said, in fact, every time the government comes out with new legislation, there's huge growth. And he went back to ERISA, the HMO Act, the early run on Hillary Care, and some other things that had been enacted over time. It just meant that more people needed more advice.
Yep.
And therefore, since these plans are very expensive, it's the second highest cost beside payroll in most firms, we need, as an industry, to give advice that's going to be sought after by the employer community when they're setting up their plans.
Well, see, and the government is a job creator. Look at that. They create jobs every time they enact legislation.
Yeah, I never looked at it that way.
So speaking of consultant, you've spent a number of years in your career on that side. So I'd like for you, if you don't mind, kind of benchmark what it's like on the carrier/vendor side versus the broker side, maybe what drew you over to the carrier and vendor side ultimately. But I know you ran a couple practices, is my understanding?
That's correct.
So tell me your experience there. What kind of roles were you playing on the broker side?
First and foremost, I look at it in that we're all in this great industry together. There's not the broker side versus the carrier side. There is no dark side of the moon. In fact, it's all dark, as they say. Therefore, the industry is really one and the same in that we can help each other. What it has given me is a really healthy perspective. When I was at the brokerage firm, I understood the carrier model really well, how to interact with our big carrier and TPA partners in a way that really facilitated both of us working together really well, and then thus growing our businesses really well together. It was very collaborative.
Okay.
And that's been my business model for my whole career. I love collaboration. I like working together to problem solve. I like the whole teamwork aspect to it. To me, that's a lot of fun. I think you get much better results that way. We did not have a firm where we went up and beat up the carrier, so to speak, to try to get the lowest price. It just wasn't our business model. When I'm here on the carrier side, I have a very healthy perspective of how brokers and consultants think. The ones who are approaching us as partners and want to work together in a collaborative way, we migrate towards those because they want to work together to solve, again, those problems. And I think that's a great environment to be in, but it's also a way for me to communicate to the team internally, hey, I think this is the driver or the motivation behind what's being looked for here. And we can also look at maybe a large RFP that's coming out saying, this is a market check. Let's respectfully help this person with that because they're trying to do their job for their client. So I think, again, just it changes the conversation to, again, point towards collaboration, teamwork. We're in this together as a whole big industry.
Well, I'm glad you had that perspective on the, I would quote unquote, say buyer side right before. But sometimes people will then shift over to the carrier world and have this new perspective of the challenges that carriers have, obviously the reps, they have in trying to sell the business. Even when I was on the outside of insurance and then became on the inside of insurance, my perspective on this industry changed dramatically. So was there any aha moments or light bulb moments shifting over to the vendor side that you didn't know, or you maybe your perception changed over time?
I would say the one thing that I maybe helped correct was the thought of what one side thought the other side was doing as far as, are they working hard?
Yeah.
Do they know what they're doing?
Yeah.
And my view is everybody's working extremely hard.
Yep.
And there are a lot of successful people in our business, but they didn't get there by not working hard. And I try to help people understand, for example, on the brokerage consulting side, we look at our one perspective as, I'll just say, a TPA. And they're working on the health plan. Little does the folks that work in this direction know that, hey, this broker is actually doing a lot of other things for the client. All their ancillary coverages, all their voluntary coverages. Oh, whenever there's new regulations or legislation that comes out, the phones are ringing off the hook at the brokerage firm. Hey, what's your view of this?
Yep.
So there's a lot of other things that they're doing to help their clients. They get pulled into human resource messes, as I did, and you're trying to help your client navigate through all of those very treacherous waters while at the same time looking at their health plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think few people recognize.
Well, I think you have to be sensitive to that as a vendor to simplify the message so that it can be digestible as quickly as possible. They understand where you fit. They understand what you actually do and what solution you can bring to them. But you probably don't have an hour or days to explain this to them. So it's like, get your message honed as quickly as possible, make it succinct, and then, drip reminders and things like that from a sales perspective. But you don't want to be a squeaky wheel for them when they have 1,000 other things that have to be done as well.
No, and the other thing it's taught me over time is to be a better listener.
Fair enough.
When a broker consultant's asking a question, when I was working for a carrier, for example, they would bring in a point solution. I'd say, that sounds like a really neat point solution. I don't think we could plug it in, but let me learn more. And just having that conversation, I think, was well appreciated. But it was showing that I was open to what's going on in the overall industry and not just saying, I got a product for that.
Yeah. Well, and even then, if you position yourself well, at least they remember it. So it may not be appropriate in this particular case or right now, but maybe a year from now or 6 months from now, they're going to find somebody that fits that particular solution. And you look like, you're a genius for recommending it as well, which is always kind of fun.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So we were going to talk, it's topical, right? The original version of this we were going to do a few months ago, which was more, this conversation was going to be about the No Surprises Act. But I think something new, a new piece of legislation has hit us, a week or so ago?
Yeah, it's a couple of weeks ago.
The testing. So describe to me what's going on, and then describe to me from your vantage point, the challenges that it introduces.
Well, like our industry, it's not real until it has an acronym. So this one became known as OTC, over the counter.
Okay, you said it earlier, and I didn't even know it yet. I hadn't even picked it up yet.
So it's what happened several weeks ago is that the administration came out with a rule that insurance companies, in their vernacular, we take it as health plans in our vernacular, were to now pay for over-the-counter testing for COVID-19.
Okay.
And we were given, as an industry, 5 days to comply and set up a system in order to help people get reimbursed or have paid for these over-the-counter tests, a maximum of 8 tests per person.
Okay.
So if you have a family of 4, they can order 8 each.
So 32.
32. Order 8 each or go and procure, from their pharmacy. The one thing we had to immediately assess, and we worked with our Aetna Corporation overall, is to say, are we going to direct this spend towards the pharmacy or in the medical?
Okay.
We landed on the pharmacy, as did most of the industry. There's a few outliers. The reason is that transaction is better taken care of within the pharmacy environment.
Well, the point of distribution being a CVS, right? Like you can pick them up there.
It could be CVS or anybody that's part of our overall pharmacy network, and we work with other PBMs as well.
Okay.
But it's where's that transaction going to be better tracked and where can it be paid for?
Okay.
Now, if you think it through for just 1 second, if you go to any pharmacy, you have the behind the pharmacy counter transaction. There are no over-the-counter transactions going on there. It's all what's behind them.
Okay.
If you take up a test to the cash register, that's not picked up by the pharmacy network as a transaction. So we had to quickly say, all right, we need to move this over to the pharmacy counter so we can track it and actually pay for it and reimburse it. Otherwise, if people were to go get the cash register, hey, you can't put down your insurance card and have that taken care of. You're going to have to pay for it and get reimbursed. So we had to set up two mechanisms.
And you had to do it in 5 days, right?
And have to do it in 5 days. And kudos to our organization, how we're able to pull this off was a wonderful feat. It's not, as an industry, it's not an elegant approach or response, but it's something that could be done within 5 days.
You could flip it. So this is the big surprise act instead of the no surprises act, right?
That's a great way to put it, Spencer.
Yeah, it's crazy. 5 days to execute on that. And we're talking about perhaps the unintended or intended consequences of making it, mandating that it's covered by insurance, right? So the obvious one, of course, is now we're going to have the cost absorbed by the industry itself, which ultimately, like you said, is the employer that's bearing that cost. But it's a weird dynamic, and it always has been a weird dynamic for me when something is mandated by the government and then the insurance carriers or vendors have to go now figure it out. And without obviously going down the path of politics, talk to me as a private business and what that, the challenges in executing on something like that, and then basically not having any say or choice of whether or not it's going to be infused in what you do from a cost of doing business.
Well, you bring up an important fact that 100 million people actually are covered under self-funded plans.
100 million?
In the U.S.
Yep.
It's a staggering number. So when you look at that, it's really ultimately the employer.
Yeah.
And the employers can be public, they can be private, it could be school districts, it could be a hospital, it could be a manufacturer. They are going to bear the cost of this new rule. I don't think that was really thought about. It was just a matter of facilitating access to testing kits on a broad scale. That's one thing I think our industry can do well, is that it could give people access to getting those tests on a very broad scale. So that was probably well-intended. But to your comment, well-intended consequences, the employers are going to have to bear the cost ultimately. And if you do the math, if it's $15 per test, you can get 8 tests per person, and you multiply that out towards your whole population on an annual basis. It's not going to represent a huge cost, but it's just an additional cost.
Well, and I guess there's going to be an immense unpredictability in that, just because that's the max number of tests people can acquire. How many actually are going to be procured in that manner? How long is this going to run? Or people forgetting about it in the spring or summer when obviously some of the numbers drop and we just all go out in the sunshine? I wonder if this is a long-term thing, if this is just a short-term reaction to make sure, like you said, that people have access to them, or is this going to be a persistent part of a healthcare plan forever? Who knows?
You open up an interesting point. Could this be something that's going to be part of a health plan for the foreseeable future, whether it's COVID-19 tests or other types of over-the-counter testing? That's to be answered, I guess, later on, but that is a possible additional cost employers would have to bear.
Yeah. Ultimately, the cost is absorbed by the system. I mean, you inject a new mandate into a system, then it's going to be paid for by somebody. These aren't magic-free tests. So, but anyway, so talking about healthcare a little more specifically, I think when we had our prep call for this, you suggested maybe a funny topic of conversation is these conversations you have people that are looking for a magic pill, a unicorn solution. I think is
unicorn.
Healthcare unicorn. But then how do you temper expectations, right? Like somebody that's coming to you and says, I want to go self-funded and I want Meritain to manage my plan because we got a really bad renewal and this is how I save money. Like you're obviously going to have to temper some expectations, but how do you position a response to somebody that is really looking for that unicorn solution?
I think you have to look at their motivation and their driver. And if it's a matter of saying, hey, I want to do this just because I want to save money, there are risks involved with self-funding, as we all know.
Yep.
And you have to have that risk tolerance within your financial model as a company to say, sure, we can both mitigate and absorb that risk should it go sideways, for example.
Okay.
So it's not for everyone. I think I come to it in that perspective is that some people are not comfortable with the risk. They need to stay fully insured, and the fully insured industry is huge, and it serves a great majority of our population. So it's certainly a model that works for a lot of folks, especially the smaller employers. So I like people to understand why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And if they're looking at the opportunity to say, I really want to craft a plan that's going to tend to my membership with my culture in mind in a very specific way. We as an industry have the ability to do that. And I say as an industry, a TPA. The idea that they can pull in different point solutions, we also want to have that conversation to say, how is this going to work within your culture as a company? That's really the big question. We were talking about wellness before. Wellness is a cultural play, by and large, within any company.
Yep.
And is that culture really going to embrace this kind of program? And the better, finely tuned programs actually do that really well and show great results because they make sure those things are married. Same thing with the point solutions, making sure, do you want something that has a lot of single guys on your plan to have a great women's health point solution? Obviously, that's not a fit. However, if you look at a population that's maybe predominantly female in those childbearing years, that's going to work really well within that culture. So you got to be mindful of all those aspects.
Well, and I think the understanding, right, is like every change you make is going to have an incremental impact, right? There is not one singular solution that solves everything, which was kind of the, why that was tongue in cheek. But are they working in conjunction with one another? Can you coordinate them properly? Yes. Is one being bolted on either going to be underutilized, or is it going to be disruptive in nature as well that might actually contradict some of the other things you're trying to do? Again, I have never sat in that position to have to make all those decisions, but at least I'm sensitive to the fact that it is not, oh, I'm going to switch to this thing now, or this network, or this provider arrangement, and we solved all of our health challenges. That's just never going to happen.
I think part of the issue at hand, Spencer, is sometimes the rush to make those decisions. Our business is on a cycle basis, renewal cycle basis. And so the renewal comes out and people say, I need to make a decision and make a change now because it's a renewal. And they're using that as their basis of the decision. It needs to happen well before that, where the employer and the consultant are going into it well ahead of time to say, regardless of the outcome of my renewal next year, this is what I'm doing because this is where I want to take it. So I find that those hasty decisions are the poor decisions, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Weston was flagging me too. Yes. Yeah, we'll make sure we get you on your way. A couple more questions here, and then I want to make sure you get to your next appointment. Excellent. The previous conversation we had about disruptors, right? I kind of weighed in my opinion of this notion of disruptors. But there are such things as good disruptors. There are things that actually do make a positive impact, even if they do disrupt maybe a legacy market or something like that. So is there anything, you don't have to necessarily names, but are any health and wellness, lifestyle, new point solutions, something that you think, or maybe just a sector that's emerging in our space that might actually be disruptive from a positive basis in healthcare?
I think the maybe one positive benefit or outcome of COVID-19 and the pandemic at large would be the focus on mental health and well-being. That had really been at the center point of what people were then starting to seek. A lot of great solutions in the marketplace, whether they're virtual, in person, or a hybrid. Different apps, if you will, to kind of track your stress levels, wearables that track stress levels now. This is all really important stuff. And I think mental health really pulls everything within the health plan together better than we've ever realized before. There's been a lot of stigma over the years with mental health. Of course. I think it's been not completely erased, but radically erased. And now people are saying this needs to be part of my health plan. And I need to spend money on this because if you spend good money on a great mental health program, it does tie everything together. And the studies are coming out over and over again about how a healthy outlook on mental health is going to reduce your stress. It can reduce obesity. It can have a lot of ties to a lot of different things. So why not focus a lot of our energies on that? And I think that's the dynamic that's taken place. That's a very positive disruptor.
Well, I think so too. I think you're spot on that mental health from a traditional perspective had a stigma that's associated with it. You presume somebody's in a really bad state of mind or perhaps, going through some very, very, very serious mental struggles. There are obviously steps to that. So somebody that might just be having a bad day, somebody that might be stressed because of a project at work, or, I've got to pick up my kids and I don't have enough time in the day to do everything. I mean, whatever the case may be, I think all of those might fall under a broader umbrella of mental health.
Yes.
And having a conversation about that and maybe early stage or easier interventions where you can reach somebody within seconds and at least talk to somebody or talk through a problem, I'm glad that that's falling under that umbrella, and it's not just what we traditionally thought of mental health. So I think you're absolutely right about that. So I'm anxious to see how that is going to emerge. Kind of last but not least, kind of broader perspective on the industry, right? So that's disruptors, point solution, but the future of healthcare at large, maybe some of it is coming out of COVID-19, but maybe some of it's just recognizing we're at perhaps an untenable breaking point, if you will, from cost, whatever the case may be. What do you think, with your history and experience, the future of healthcare might look like for us?
I actually am very bullish on the outlook within our industry. I think we are at a point where employers are embracing the fact that this is part of what they provide as an employer. And there's hyper competition going on now for employees. And the health plan that you offer really is at the pinnacle of what we offer as an employer. For example, when you're seeking someone to become an employee, in addition to pay, in addition to the other benefits, that's really there in the center of it. I think employers are realizing they can really make the health plan a benefit that's truly going to be embraced by the population, and it's going to be part of their value proposition as an employer. Therefore, I'm seeing a real drive towards employers wanting control of that health plan and not acquiescing it to the government.
Yeah.
So I think it's starting to move the other way than maybe where we saw it 10 years ago.
Not to mention doubling down, like you said, on the notion that it is an attractor of top quality talent, right? Like you've heard that before, right? Like what do the benefits package look like? Well, what is the next degree of that, right? In mental health, point solutions, lifestyle, whatever bolt-ons you want, or just lowering the cost of care by hopefully simultaneously improving the quality of the member's plan, right? Maybe lowering deductibles, removing them altogether, lowering co-insurance. Those things can be accomplished, and then you can actually have people publicly be advocates for your company because your health plan is so strong.
And I'll add in one other fact. I was talking to a very large manufacturer who was bemoaning the cost of the health plan.
Okay.
And I said, well, you have a lot of very expensive equipment out on that floor. How much do you spend as an expenditure of that total cost of that equipment on maintenance? He said, probably between 10 and 12%. I said, well, you're spending that on your health plan for your other capital expense, humans.
Yep.
And once that was reconciled, it's like, I never really looked at it that way and took on a whole different attitude and direction.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, there's ongoing maintenance of people at the same time, right? And the better you maintain them, the better their life is going to be, and the plan's going to perform. So a couple minutes, last but not least, closing thoughts, Dan. I appreciate your time here today. Thanks for including this in your schedule, and thank you to Jonathan for setting this up. But kind of leave us with a nugget or your closing thoughts for the podcast today.
Well, again, I'm very bullish on our industry. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you for what you're doing. You're spreading a great message out to the marketplace. I think more people need to hear, and I really appreciate you having me on as your guest to be part of it.
All right, man. Well, we'll get you on your way and get you to your next stop. But Dan, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.